Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickett. We're back for our Conversations with the Candidates series, where I'll be sitting down with each of the candidates running in the upcoming recall election, which will be held Tuesday, December 5th, 2017. On this program, I'm joined by Christine Howe, who is running against incumbent Selectman David Sousa for the seat that expires in April 2020. The recall election is a little bit different of a process than how a regular election would work, whereas in a regular selectman election where there are multiple selectmen on the ballot, it's basically the top two finishers are the winners. In this case, each candidate is specifically going up against one of the incumbent selectmen. And you'll be asked two questions on the ballot. You'll be asked whether you're for or against the recall of one of the particular selectmen. And then you'll have a separate question which, regardless of how you voted for that first question, you'll have to select a preference of candidate, either, in this case, Christine Howe or David Sousa. And again, that's regardless of how you voted for or against the recall. So we have Christine on the show today, and let's give you a chance to introduce yourself. I know you're on the High School Building Committee, Finance Committee, Glen Echo Committee, but this is your first foray into elected politics, so give you a chance to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me today. As you stated, I have been involved in the town for a number of years now on a variety of committees, and really that involvement stemmed from growing up here in Stoughton and really entering into local government in the public sector. That's where my career is. I started working in the public sector during my undergrad years. I worked in the Stoughton Recreation Department during the summers, and by being in the town hall and being involved in that regard, I decided that I would pursue a career in the public sector. So a lot of that has influenced what I've done academically, professionally, and serving on the boards and committees in town as a lifelong resident.
Now, we had you on as a guest for a program that was informing residents about the recall effort back in August. Mm-hmm. At what point did you decide that you wanted to do something more than just be part of the group that was organizing the recall and pushing for the recall? At what point did you decide, I want to actually be one of the people that potentially replaces one of the selectmen?
Yeah, I knew after seeing those meetings, the 6-minute long meeting at the end of June and then the one in July that was 15 minutes, I looked at that board, those 3 members in particular, and I said to myself, do I trust that they're making the best decision for the town of Stoughton? Do I trust that they're going to continue to serve in the best interest of all residents? And I said to myself, no, I don't. And I knew that if the recall petition was successful, that I would step up and I would run for one of the seats. It wasn't an easy decision. It took a lot of thought, but when you don't trust that your board's going to serve you and serve every resident, someone needs to step up and do that. And I knew with my experience and my commitment to the town that I was ready to step into that role and run for the Board of Selectmen.
So I like discussing political process, and obviously there were 3 selectmen that are being recalled, and there are 3 candidates. First of all, how did you come to the decision to run for the seat that you're running against? Again, the seat that expires in 2020, which you might argue that that's the highest profile seat because it's held by the current incumbent of the selectman, David Sousa. Mm-hmm. So how did you come to the decision to choose that that's the seat I want to go for?
There were a couple factors. I was willing to run for any seat, but I looked at what was happening, and as the chairman of the board, Mr. Sousa, in my opinion, is the most responsible for what has happened. He's responsible for setting the agendas, leading the board, and ultimately leading the plan for the town, and his actions, his lack of transparency and lack of respect for the residents of the town and for other town employees and other board members really just compelled me to run for that 3-year seat. And I also knew that I wanted to show that I was committed to this town. I'm a younger person. I have a lot of opportunities out there, and I wanted to prove that Stoughton is my home, and I'm ready to serve the town for the long term, for the 3-year seat.
Now, there are 2 other candidates running against 2 other selectmen. Was there discussions as to who was running against who? Because obviously, if the three of you who are running all pulled for the same race and there aren't any candidates for the other race, that sort of defeats the purpose of what I assume the recall is going for. So how did you come to the decision? Was it a mutual decision where you talked with the other candidates?
We had discussions about it because they were also supportive of the recall effort. But ultimately, I decided that the 3-year seat was the one I wanted to go after. As you mentioned, it's the incumbent seat for the chairman, and it is a difficult seat because Mr. Sousa has such support in this town. But like I said, he, in my opinion, was the most responsible, and that's the seat that I wanted to go for.
And any pushback from any of the other two candidates saying, well, I want to go for that seat? Or I'm just trying to get like an inside look as to how each of the three candidates ultimately settled on, which seat they would be running for.
Yeah, I think we all just knew we wanted to run, and they sorted themselves out in that way. There was some discussion about definitely that we wanted to run for the positions, but in a recall election like this, anyone can pull papers for any seat. So there was always a chance that there could be 3 or 4 names on the ballot. But like I said, that 3-year seat was the one that I wanted, just to prove that I'm really committed to this, and I do believe that the chairman is the most responsible.
So you brought up the June meeting, which it was announced that the town manager would not be coming back, and they would be bringing in an interim town manager in. And then the other meeting I believe you mentioned is when they ultimately appointed Mr. Anastos as the interim town manager. Since that point, have you noticed any improvements from the board, or have you noticed that there's maybe things are a little bit more settled down than the period where there was constant movement in the town manager's office and there was a lot of questions as to exactly who the town manager was?
I'm going to have to say no, because at this point, there is still no search committee to look for a permanent town manager. The interim's contract expires at the end of December, and I've seen no action from the board to put together a search committee for a permanent town manager. So now having an additional almost 5 months to do that and implement that process, the board still has not. There was issues with the Glen Echo project initially, and until the residents and the members of that committee provided some pushback as to which town council was responsible for running that project, that wasn't happening. I still haven't heard any movement on the capital improvement plan. So there are things that are still being left behind, and there is still a lawsuit against the town from the previous town manager. That's still open litigation. So luckily there's an interim in place. It's not like the town doesn't have someone running it. But again, there's been no search committee, and the board still has had some volatile meetings in the previous few months since that July meeting.
If a search committee had been appointed, or formed rather, sometime between the December 15th, 2016 meeting where it was voted on that Mr. Hartman's contract was not going to be renewed, but that he was eligible to reapply for his position, and the date at the end of June 2017 where ultimately he was dismissed, if a search committee had been formed during that period, do you feel that would you have been in support of that? Where people who are supporting the recall right now have supported that, given some of them might not have wanted Mr. Hartman removed in the first place?
I think if the board had made an effort to change their pattern of behavior of closed, non-transparent decision-making. So like you said, if they had put together a search committee, made it open and obvious that they were looking for a new town manager, that this was the process they were going to follow, I think if they had done that, then we wouldn't be in the position we are now, because there wouldn't have been a lawsuit potentially. There wouldn't have been sort of this appointment of someone without review of a contract. In theory, they would have put together their search committee and gone through a hiring process that was open and transparent, and it would have showed a shift in the pattern of behavior that they had been practicing up until that point. But that didn't happen, and they've continued to have closed off decision making and not move on projects, and continue to just show a lack of respect and, professionalism in the role as a member of the board. So ultimately, excuse me, I think that if they had changed their behavior and shown that they were willing to work as professionals together on the board, then we may not be in this position, but that didn't happen, so here we are today.
Is it fair to say, or do you feel that there might be a sense that if the April 2017 election had gone differently, that people might have been holding out for hopes of a different result in that election in terms of dealing with the town manager situation? Because certainly if Mr. Sousa is not reelected, you could argue that if Mr. Hill had been elected instead, there might have been a different result with the town manager's contract situation. Do you get the sense that it might have been a wishful thinking, let's see what happens in April, and when something didn't happen, there was the next move, which was, all right, now we saw how David Sousa handled the recall, we need to remove him. Do you get the sense that that timeline, that kind of is a sense of where some people might have been thinking? Because I didn't see people coming up to meetings between December and April saying we need a search committee, we need a search committee, we need a search committee. You're kind of hearing that after the fact. Yeah,
I hadn't heard that, and I can't sort of conjecture on what would have, could have, or should have happened. You can flip that question in the reverse and say if Michael Sullivan hadn't been elected or someone else had been elected, then what would have happened?
Sure, you can make the argument in that case that they have a clear 4-1 vote to fire the town manager.
Right. So ultimately, we can't go back in time and change what wasn't done. So we can only move forward from here and look at the decisions that led us up to this point and what we can do to fix those problems. And the answer to that is to have the recall and to remove those members of the board.
So let's say there are residents who are watching. They're impressed with your resume. They're impressed with you, but they're feeling apprehensive about the recall itself. If this was a regular April election, Christine Howe looks like a great candidate, but this is the recall. How do you feel about? How do you speak to residents who might be uneasy with a recall in general?
Yeah, so I would say to those residents, find out the facts, find out what happened, understand why the recall is taking place, the lack of action, the lack of professionalism. Watch those meetings because it's only 6 minutes, it's only 15 minutes. You can see the behavior, and then ask yourself, do I want those individuals representing me as a resident of Stoughton? Do I want them representing my town? And then look at the other candidates and decide in the election on December 5th.
So what will you bring that's different to the table? What are some of your goals, your visions, if elected to the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, I think I have a unique perspective as a millennial, as they like to say, but I also have a strong financial background. I work for a regional planning agency, so I have experience working with municipalities. And I also, growing up in this town, I was involved with the recreation department, as I mentioned, Glen Echo, and I have a strong desire to ensure that those open spaces, that those community resources are funded appropriately, and that we can continue to expand those, whether it's Council on Aging, the Rec Department, the Youth Commission. I think those resources are sometimes lost amongst large budgets because they're typically smaller, and I think having a strong vision of incorporating those more in the town. The downtown gets a lot of attention, the high school gets a lot of attention, but I think when you talk about quality of life and improving the community for all the residents, that's where it really stems from, is a lot of those positive community programs.
Let's talk about Glen Echo a little bit. You're on the committee, and there has been a lot of discussion about it lately. It was a very high-profile vote at town meeting back in, I believe it was 2011.
Yes.
Where is the status of that project now? I'll leave it there. Where is the status of that project?
So there was a bit of a holdup on the project with the transition of town council, and then the state has requirements for conservation restriction to be placed on the acreage of land that was purchased that counts as conservation land. 6 acres is designated recreation land, so the restriction would be everything else of the 97 acres. And so there was sort of a stopgap there when they changed town council, and no one had access to sort of the records of information as to what council had been in communication with the state. And also, the state was a little bit non-responsive to the committee with getting meetings and things to determine exactly what we needed to get this conservation restriction on the land. Well, they were able, Mark Tisdale in the engineering department at the town of Stoughton was able to put together a meeting with the state agents from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And so I believe they've worked out what would count as a survey of the land so that we can get that conservation restriction. There's still a few questions as to the exact cost and what we'll have to do, but I think we're in good position now to move forward with the project and actually, get going on the implementation plans that we worked with a consultant to develop.
Are we looking at ultimately having swimming hole there and having people be able to have, cookouts, swim, have like that type of active recreation, or is it, going to be more like a Bird Street conservation where, you go walking trails and...
Yeah, I think it's going to be something sort of in between. Mm-hmm. And, the town will ultimately be able to decide that. The first phase of the implementation plan is simple things like a road to get in, parking. Mm-hmm. There's, a little bit of like creating a grass lawn so that people can play, lawn games, frisbee, and making things ADA accessible, having some picnic tables and maybe a few of the grills. So there is, this first phase so that people can get to the space, have access to the space and enjoy it. And then, there's potential for further sort of development to turn it into a swimming hole like Ames Pond or, have more robust trails like in Bird Street.
And I'd like to clear up because there were certainly talk around the town that there wasn't clear title to the land. And there's been talk about that since pretty much the property was purchased. Mm-hmm. What is the title situation with Glen Echo?
There is title. The town owns it. The town has the deed to the land. There were a few parcels that the town did not purchase, mm-hmm. and those were the questions that were being raised that previous town council had raised in, I think it was 2010. Mm-hmm. So the town does own the land. Mm-hmm. We own all 97 acres. You can go up there, and you can, if you can drive your car up the sort of potholed road and find a place to park, you can go hike around. It's a beautiful area, so I would encourage the residents to go check it out.
Now, one of the I would say talking points I noticed early on from when the recall was in the stages of collecting signatures was that this might impact the building projects, the library and the high school. Mm-hmm. And there was actually even an ad in the Penny Saver, which stated as such. This was August 16th. Both the multi-million-dollar library and high school building projects are being built now. Each project has been impacted by the board's actions. One contractor has even expressed written concerns over who is duly authorized to appropriate their work. And actually, a week before on a program we did about the recall, mm-hmm. you had also talked about some those similar sentiments and said that that it can even potentially impact the bond rating and the cost, cost the town a lot of money. Is that something that you would, given the fact that the town's bond rating has now been upgraded, is that something that, given some time has passed, that's no longer something like that you would stake claim to?
Well, those particular comments were made when we had the town accountant as the interim town manager.
Right.
The selectman had to backtrack.
No, Mr. Nastos was the town manager when those comments were made.
When the advertisement was
yes.
put out. So let me finish
yeah.
the point. But the town accountant was appointed. They mm-hmm. had to backtrack and then appoint Mr. Nastos as the town manager. Mm-hmm. So that shift in those 2 weeks over which that took place was the time period of question. Mm-hmm. So is this person rightfully appointed to interim town manager? Do they have the right to sign these invoices and so on? So that is where the email from the Consigli group, which is the construction group managing the high school project, originated from. And so that was a period of question. Mm-hmm. As for the bond rating, it takes several years for that to be impacted. And things such as liability that the town is subject to, different procurement processes, those types of things that are in place, investment policies, free cash policies, those all impact the bond rating. So if you don't have a manager in place that is able to appropriately manage sort of the budget and the operations of town, and you have activity that may put the town at more risk, such as a lawsuit, that will impact your bond rating over time, and that could impact, sort of fiscal, fiscal integrity of the town.
But certainly at this current moment, you're on the high school building committee. That project, it's going forward. There's no impact to this project at this current moment.
At this current moment, no.
And now a lawsuit, that's speculative though. We don't know exactly what the settlement will be.
We don't know, that's
Right.
correct. If you look at other surrounding towns, I believe in Easton they just had a settlement. That cost that town, six figures. I think it was close to $300,000 or maybe more. So, knowing this could have all been avoided if they had just followed the proper procedure to fire the town manager. That's not something you want to sort of subject the town to and the residents, especially while we have these construction projects going on, especially while we have voted for, a debt exclusion that's going to increase, one's taxes. So you don't want to see money being diverted to other places because funds are limited. You only have so much to work with every year with the budget. So if you have to be paying out extra unnecessarily, you can't allocate that to, like I said, the community programs that the rec department's doing, or the police department budget, or the fire department budget.
Now, would you consider Mr. Anastos for permanent town manager? If you get on the board December 5th, would you consider? If
we have the search committee in place and he applies for the job, then he'll go through the same process as everyone else that applies. One's experience and qualifications, one's resume, public interviews, that all gets, sort of worked out through the process of hiring someone. And I think that should be open and that anyone should be welcome to apply. I don't know Mr. Anastos' qualifications at this point. I know he's been the interim now for 5 months or so, or 3 months or so. So he's welcome to apply, but you can't just, say that, someone isn't or someone is. You have to go through the whole process to hire them.
The last time that there was a town manager search, there was an interim town manager for almost a year. So realistically, how long would you expect a process like this to take?
I'm not sure on the exact time frame. I know that there's different consulting groups that do this. UMass Boston has the Collins Center, which works with towns to hire town managers. There's a few towns surrounding us that are currently looking for town managers, such as Mansfield. So, we can sort of look at those other towns that are comparable communities and what they've done to determine what the exact cost would be for the search. Look at some previous, the other ways we've hired town managers in the past and put together similar looking committees. Look at things that have worked and try to implement the same process. I would say it couldn't be done in any less than, 3 to 6 months, just based on sort of how long everything would take with open public meetings and things like that.
Now, obviously, an election like this, any election can get contentious, but this one has seemed to particularly been, a contentious election. What do you say to residents on either side just about, maintaining some civility during this process? Yeah,
definitely, understand that your passion is matched by someone else's passion, and that ultimately boils down to that you care about Stoughton and you want what's best for Stoughton. So just try to remember that as you sort of approach someone and talk about it. And that's what I've tried to bring, is sort of that level of civility, and just introduce myself and just let people know that I'm doing this because I care about the town and I want to do what's best for the town. And if you can bring that message forward, I think that we can have a positive discussion and less argument about it.
Do you feel that come December 6th, the day after the recall, there's just win or lose, no matter how it goes, there's going to have to be some healing across the town?
Yeah, there will definitely need to be some sort of, bridging some gaps, understanding what happened, and then also understanding that we're all working together to move forward. And I think that if that's clearly communicated and people are open to that, then we'll be able to survive after December 5th.
Now, obviously one of the other key points in the argument for a recall was the town manager lack of evaluation. Now, do you feel, because just observing boards, not even just the selectmen, other boards as well over the course of the years, evaluations haven't always been a consistent practice. Do you feel that maybe the board should implement a policy where or start having more regular evaluations, whether it be the first of every year, the first of every fiscal year, or the anniversary of the hiring date.
Yeah.
Regardless of the situation.
So are you asking in regard to volunteer boards?
Sure. Yeah. We'll use the two ones that come to mind, selectmen and school committee, because they're kind of organized in the same way, where it's a board of directors more or less overseeing a chief executive officer of, in one side the town, the other side the schools.
Yeah. While you would like there to be sort of an evaluation of everyone and how they're acting, town employees are evaluated. They're hired. They're paid. They're the paid people in the town that are doing the jobs. Selectmen, school committee members, those individuals are elected. So you have to hope that the voters are doing their own sort of evaluation before they get to the polls.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant evaluating, like the selectmen. Should there be a policy in place where the selectmen have to evaluate the town manager on a certain date, whether it be, the anniversary date of the hiring or beginning of the year or fiscal year, just to make sure that there is an evaluation happening?
Yes, I mean, that is typically built into the contract. And I think that's an integral part of an employee review. You can't determine how, the progress that someone's making or how good or bad they are unless you have an evaluation. And I think most people in their professional lives receive performance reviews either 6 months or annually, and that's how you determine if you're getting a raise, if there's things you need to work on, if there's gaps in your communication, those kinds of things. So without an evaluation like that, you're not going to be able to determine if the employee you have is doing the right job. And so I think that's a critical part of any position, any hired position.
So as our time winds down, I'll give you the opportunity to make a closing remark. So, more or less, make a pitch to voters as to why, one, they should be supporting the recall, and two, why you should be their choice for selectmen.
Yeah. I'm a passionate resident of this town. I've been living here my whole life and involved on boards and committees. I'm a product of this town, and I just believe that the role of selectmen should be, someone who represents the town's best interests. And I hope to return that professionalism and that trust to the board, respect individuals that I'm working with, and just bring that to this role. And I hope that residents will vote for me on December 5th in the recall election, and we can return that trust to the Board of Selectmen.
All right, well, thank you very much. I want to thank Christine for joining me. Christine Howe, candidate for the Board of Selectmen. Again, she's running for the seat that expires in April 2020 against current Selectman David Sousa. I want to thank you for tuning in to Stoughton Spotlight, and make sure you check out our other conversations with the other candidates running in this December 5th recall election. Thanks for tuning in.